Do I think a gaming crash is coming? Obviously, there's a ton of layoffs going on right now. That is extremely unfortunate. Thousands and thousands of people being laid off. And it's no mystery. I mean, I told you guys on Wednesday, buckle up for more layoffs to be announced. And already, like within the last 36 hours, we're getting announcements of like gearboxes being sold. There's going to be layoffs. I forget what the name of the smaller studio is. Saber Interactive's being sold off to somebody. We'll talk about that in a later segment on the stream. So like there's a lot of stuff still happening. And so obviously there's a problem within the community, or within the industry rather. And I think gamers are sort of separated from it for a handful of reasons. But the primary problem at the core of the gaming industry right now is just that games are too expensive to make, specifically on the AAA and quadruple A scale. And that lands on executives' shoulders. That lands on the shoulders of the people greenlighting projects and trying to make everything into like massive open world action RPGs. And even then, like they aren't necessarily the most profitable or successful games, even when they do that. Not every game needs to be The Witcher 3. And so I think what we're going to see as far as a crash is concerned is probably like a focus on shorter storylines. You're going to see scope significantly narrowed. So like the next God of War, I don't think we're going to see a God of War game that's like 60 hours long. I just don't think we see. Even 40 hours is a stretch. I think the Spider-Man 2 like 15-hour campaign is probably where most of these games are going to land. Even then, you're getting a lot of games that are still stupid expensive. Like Spider-Man 2 apparently cost upwards of $300 million, which puts it up there with the likes of like some of the most expensive superhero action films from Hollywood that were crazy successful in their own right. So they have to find a way to trim costs. That's going to come by shrinking the teams, shrinking the budgets and scope and everything, and figuring that out. I think that you're going to see scope lessened. I think you're going to see a lot of these companies leaning more into new, innovative tool sets. You're going to see, love it or hate it, I think an embracing of AI tools a lot. It's going to hit departments like probably art, like concept art, really hard, because I think for these executives, they're looking at it and they're like, why do we need to pay 20 concept artists when we can pay one and then just give him a license to Midjourney? He can feed in pictures that he's drawn or painted or whatever, and then Midjourney will create duplicates of different settings in that style. Easy, do that. I think that's what they're going to start doing. So you're going to see a lot of that stuff. There are apparently some AI tools that are getting really good as far as like, it's basically the modeling portion where you feed it pictures of different things and then it creates 3D models for you. They were really bad like a year ago. They're already getting pretty good. So I'm sure there's going to be investments made into that, and they're going to really try to get that to be viable. So people who model objects are basically out of work. And that's going to be useful because that's a lot of contracted work that these companies are usually hiring outside studios to do. So you're going to see some of those specialized contracting studios get screwed over. Basically, we're just in a time where it's kind of a matter of reinvention. The current industry is just not sustainable. And we've said it for a long time. You can't sell $70 games where the question of quality is really up in the air. Thankfully now, unlike the 80s, you can watch YouTubers, streamers, reviewers, whatever, and get an idea of the quality before you go out and buy it. The problem in the 80s is that YouTube wasn't a thing. The internet wasn't a thing. The extent of like gaming journalism was an like semi-annual magazine that you would buy. And it was all like bought and paid for by Nintendo and these big companies. So it wasn't a free market of information really. Now, it is. And we saw that with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, where that game, I think in a vacuum, probably could look pretty good to a lot of people. Could have sold a couple million copies at least, and a lot of people would have, I would argue, gotten burned when they realized how short the game was, how repetitive it was, and all of that. But because of the broader community of reviewers, of streamers, of YouTubers just in general, we were able to kind of warn everybody about those things before they wasted their money on it. And so I don't really foresee a crash akin to the 80s happening, But I do think that we're already seeing big, huge budget AAA production value projects that release and almost nobody buys them. Immortals of Avium is a great example. Forspoken's a great example. The Saints Row reboot is a great example. There are unfortunately many of these that you can point to. And as a result, like, the companies are having to find ways to balance that out because they can't afford to just launch a dozen flops and just burn through billions of dollars hoping that they get one that gets hit out of the park. And I think that that was such a business plan of extreme arrogance for these executives to think that they could just make, it's basically been PlayStation's strategy for the PS5 gen, is that they wanted to make 12 live service games that launched before the second quarter of 2026. Cool idea. The whole premise of that, though, is that probably 10 to 11 of those are going to flop and make no money, lose tons of money. But the one or two that are successful, like a Helldivers, is going to make up for the others. Turns out, no, the only ones that are finding success are the ones that are not egregiously monetized. All of the others are just wholly uninteresting, and they're affecting your production of single player titles that generate very wide margin revenue figures for your like single player studios like Naughty Dog. So they end up canceling a bunch of projects that never see the light of day, wasting all of this time and money and losing a lot of talent in the process. And because now debt is not free, and because financing is difficult and companies have to be careful with their money, unlike 5 years ago or 4 years ago when you could just kind of do whatever you wanted because the government was footing the bill, now they're having to reevaluate and actually find a way to run a sustainable business. And unfortunately, that takes the form of laying off a ton of people, canceling a ton of projects, and trying to reinvent themselves. Like, honestly, this current crash that's happening now with all these layoffs should have probably happened in 2020 or 2021. The reason it didn't was because debt was so freaking cheap when rates went to zero that these companies could just take on all of this debt to bankroll whatever projects they wanted, to leverage themselves out above a cliff, and then they just kind of went with it for as long as they could, hoping that they could just stumble into a successful game that would print money. And when they didn't, now you see them suffering the consequences now. Now you see them being like, okay, well, we have to actually run this like an effective business. And unfortunately, the people that suffer are the people on the bottom, the people that the executives consider to be expendable. I also think, Tobias, I think you're right. Marketing has screwed a lot of games. And, you know, it's like we said with Saints Row when we first saw that trailer of like the hip, cool Gen Z. I remember the first time we saw this, we're like, oh, that actually looks pretty good. And then we start to see like this guy. Like, what the hell is this? What the hell is this? And then you see all the like hipster dudes, all the like metrosexual Gen Zers, and you're like, what? Or what do they call them? Zoomers is the young generation like this? And I remember seeing this and thinking, who is this supposed to appeal to? Like, they put this together and clearly they thought people were going to see this and think he looks cool and be like, ooh, I want to be like him. I want to play that. I relate to him. I connect with him. Nobody I've ever met would connect to this individual. Everybody I know would not want to be friends with this guy because he embodies everything wrong with the younger generation. You know, like everything wrong. I cannot fathom why anybody would think he's likable or interesting, or why you'd want to play a game where he's a member of the core cast. As the game, you know, got closer and closer, we got more trailers, more gameplay looks. It just looked worse and worse and worse. And I realized something. I was like, who does this appeal to? I'm asking that question. Who would find this cool? And then it hit me. Oh. The people that are making and designing these games and writing these stories think that's cool because it's them. It's these people that come out of art school and think that this is really badass, and they all sit in a conference room together without any outside input. And so they're just in an echo chamber, which is why we get Saints Row coming out, everybody unanimously mocking it for being so cringy, and they are genuinely shocked. Like, they're actually stunned that people find this cringy. It's the same thing with like Forspoken. The cringe related to Forspoken's writing was a total surprise to the devs, apparently, based on interviews after the fact. They were genuinely stunned. Like, we thought people were going to connect with her. We just are kind of in shock a little bit. And it's because they didn't talk to anybody on the outside. Or if they heard somebody with an alternate opinion, they dismissed it as hateful or spiteful or bigoted or whatever else. Like, if I don't think that this guy looks interesting, if I think that this guy is like somebody I would want to actively avoid in my day-to-day life, that's not me being like a bigot. It's me being, I think, a rational human being that doesn't want to be around narcissistic megalomaniacs, which is coming from a YouTuber. If anybody knows narcissistic egomaniacs and megalomaniacs, it's me. I would know it. And I don't want anything to do with this guy. That should tell you everything you need to know. So with it, I think that you're right. Like, I think the writing and marketing of these games has really harmed them. And I think maybe it's the Fortnite-ification of games where like all of these companies are trying to tap into that same market. But it's the fundamental like fallacy of all of this is that they think you can just make sort of a Fortnite game that looks vaguely like Fortnite and Fortnite players will come to it. No. Fortnite players are very much entrenched in the Fortnite ecosystem. They're not going to just bail for some weird Saints Row reboot like this. They're just not. They're not. So you're trying to appeal to a market that's already been claimed. It just doesn't make sense. It's why, like, I think fan feedback, I think the early access with community support is a great way to do it. You know, there's plenty of games, Baldur's Gate 3 being a great example, that have been built on fan and community feedback. And when the community doesn't like something, they adjust it and change it. And they bail on it. But I mean, you're seeing it even now. Like, I won't go into it, but there were people that worked on Suicide Squad, let's just say, that were very, very upset and took the critiques and criticisms of the game very, very personally because they worked on it. They're passionate about it. I get it. If I worked on something for years, I would want it to be successful too. But if it's a cringy, broken, boring pile of garbage, that's what's going to be the narrative. Like, all the other great work doesn't matter. Putting together a cinematic trailer like this is not easy. Just doing this is a remarkable feat for any group to pull off. This is crazy cool. But at the end of the day, you're trying to sell me a video game. I don't really foresee there being a crash akin to the 80s. I do think we're going to see, well, we're already seeing a lot of cancellations of big projects. And I don't think we're going to see as many like big AAA or quadruple A attempts at reboots or at spin-off games or new IP. I just don't think we see that. I think games are going to have to really earn or franchises will have to really earn their budgets. And you're not going to see companies taking big risks on like a $200 million Saints Row reboot. But the reason why I don't think that it's going to feel like that big of a crash is just because players weren't playing those games anyways. So it's not like we're really going to be losing anything. If anything, we'll lose maybe one or two really cringy games a year that are just horrible, but I don't think that that will necessarily be the worst thing. It's an interesting question, very interesting question, but I really do not foresee, I don't foresee a crash quite akin to it. He took my thing.